If you spend enough time online, sooner or later someone will tell you that seed oils are destroying your health. And rapeseed oil or canola oil, as many of you know it, is usually right there on the list of suspects. It supposedly causes inflammation. It supposedly damages your body because of omega 6. Some people even claim that butter or animal fat is automatically the healthier choice. There's just one problem. When you actually look at controlled human studies, that story starts falling apart. I recently used rapeseed oil when making homemade mayonnaise here on this channel, and apparently that was enough to start a nutritional civil war. Because one of the claims that came up was that rapeseed oil is highly inflammatory. Now, I'm not claiming mayonnaise is health food, it's mayonnaise. But if we're going to call an ingredient inflammatory or dangerous, I think we should at least ask some simple questions. What does the research actually show? So that's exactly what I did. And this is where the anti-seed oil argument becomes a little clever. Because it isn't completely invented out of thin air. Rapeseed oil, like other vegetable oils, contains omega 6 fatty acids. The main one is linoleic acid. And yes, the body can use linoleic acid in pathways that are connected to inflammatory processes. So the internet version becomes very simple. More omega 6 equals more inflammation. It sounds logical, it sounds scientific. But human biology has a bad habit of being more complicated than a social media slogan. The important question is not whether someone can draw a biochemical pathway. The important question is this: when real human beings actually eat more linoleic acid, do inflammatory markers go up? That question has already been studied. A systematic review and meta analysis looked at 30 randomized controlled trials involving more than 1,300 people. Researchers looked at inflammatory markers like CRP, IL-6, and TNF alpha. An overall increasing linoleic acid intake did not significantly increase those inflammatory markers. Another earlier review came to much the same conclusion. In other words, the popular claim that omega 6 automatically causes inflammation is not a good summary of what controlled human trials have shown. That does not mean omega 6 is magical. And it does not mean more is always better. It simply means that the internet claim is much stronger than the evidence behind it. And I'm certainly not the first person to notice that disconnect. Harvard researchers have addressed this exact topic. They've pointed out that the idea that seed oils are inherently inflammatory keeps spreading online, even though studies do not support that simple conclusion. Their point is not that you should drink the stuff by glass. Their point is much more reasonable. These oils can be a perfectly normal part of healthy diet, especially when they replace fats that are higher in saturated fats. And that brings us to rapeseed oil specifically, because this is where things get even more awkward for the anti-seed oil argument. A systematic review of meta-analysis from 2020 looked at 42 controlled clinical trials involving canola oil, which is what rapeseed oil is commonly called in North America. Compared with other edible oils, canola oils reduced total cholesterol and LDL cholesterol, and compared with saturated fats, the differences were even more meaningful. Another meta-analysis of 27 randomized trials also found reductions in total cholesterol and LDL. Now stop and think about how strange that is. Online, you can find people talking about rapeseed oil as though it were industrial poison. But controlled trials are finding improvements in important cardiovascular risk factors. Those two stories do not fit together very well. Then comes the next argument. But is it processed? And yes, much commercial vegetable oil is refined, and that part is true. It can be extracted and processed in ways that sound scary when described in dramatic language. But sounding scary is not the same thing as being shown to be harmful in normal use. Harvard had also addressed the fear around solvent extraction and the tiny residual amounts involved. And the evidence does not support the idea that this makes rapeseed oil a health disaster. If you personally prefer cold pressed rapeseed oil, that is completely fair. If you prefer olive oil for flavor, also fair. But is it processed? It is processed. It's not the same thing as it causes inflammation. Those are two very different claims. And I think this is one of the big reasons seed oils in general got such a terrible reputation in the first place. They are everywhere in foods that generally are not all that healthy. Fast food, packaged snacks, deep fried convenience foods, cakes, highly processed products. If someone removes a lot of those foods from their diet, they may absolutely feel better. They may improve their health. But that still does not prove that the rapeseed oil inside those foods was the main problem. Those foods can also contain a lot of refined carbohydrates, salt, sugar, and calories, and they are often very easy to overeat. So we have to be careful not to confuse a whole unhealthy dietary pattern with proof that one single ingredient is toxic. And then we come to butter. Now, I like butter. This is not an anti-butter rant. Butter tastes good. That is not the issue here. The issue is whether butter is automatically the healthier choice, simply because some people online distrust seed oils. And that is a very different question. Rapeseed oil is relatively low in saturated fats and contains mostly unsaturated fats. Butter is high in saturated fats. And major heart health organizations still recommend replacing more saturated fats with unsaturated plant oils, including canola oil, because that tends to improve LDL cholesterol and cardiovascular risk. So when somebody says, throw away the rapeseed oil and use butter instead because it's healthier, they have moved a very long way beyond what the evidence actually supports. Now, none of this means rapeseed oil is a miracle food. It's not medicine. It's not going to save your life. And pouring more oil into your food does not magically make the meal healthier. Calories still matter. The rest of your diet still matters. How you cook still matters. And there are perfectly good reasons to choose olive oil, butter, or another fat depending on flavor and what you're making. Nutrition is not supposed to be a religion with one approved bottle of fat. But there is a huge difference between saying, I personally prefer another cooking fat, and saying, rapeseed oil causes chronic inflammation. The second statement is a scientific claim, and scientific claims need evidence. So after looking through controlled trials, systematic reviews, and statements from major nutrition researchers, here's where I land. Is rapeseed oil perfect? No. Is every food containing seed oil automatically healthy? Obviously not. But does the available human research justify calling rapeseed oil an inflammatory killer? No. And that, I think, is the part that got lost. Maybe the most dangerous ingredient in your kitchen is not rapeseed oil. Maybe it is nutrition advice that sounds fantastic in a 20-second video, but falls apart the moment someone actually checks the studies. See you in the next one.